Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Writers Chat. So glad to have you with us, whether you're here live and in the chat or watching later on the replay. I'm Johnny Alexander. I get to be the host today, at least for a few minutes. Jeannie's with us, but she's got to leave early, and Bethany Jett is traveling also. So we're really excited today to turn the hosting duties over to our creative director for Writers Chat and Serious Writer, Rebecca Doris. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about her because she's so amazing. She's a graphic designer and owns Isaiah 53 Design, and I love this. Rebecca loves transforming a client's passion into visual story. So if you need someone to help you do that, she's the person to contact. She blogs at morethantheancients.com. She's written for Keys for Kids, The Old Schoolhouse, and has written over 600 articles ghostwriting. And so we can't tell you who those people are for. She's a raving fan of Vanderbilt, her kids' creative masterpieces, and she has 8 of them, which she homeschools. And especially, she's a fan of her husband, David. So, Rebecca, we're so glad to have you doing this today, and really glad to have you as our creative director here at Writers Chat. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much for your words. And I'm so excited to introduce y'all to my friend Jolina and to talk to her for a few minutes because I haven't gotten to talk to her face to face in years. But Jolina Petersheim is a spunky little lady.
My husband would say yes.
Yes, she is. She's the author of 4 novels, and one is a Christie finalist. She was my youngest bridesmaid, and she is the person who, humanly speaking, it has had the most to do to inspire me to be a writer. She writes Amish fiction with a rawness that entices people who normally hate Amish fiction to stay up all night reading her stuff. Mm-hmm. If you like edge of your seat, dare to put down the book until daybreak, then you need to pick up some of her books because they're absolutely incredible. She also writes a blog that's a work of art in its own right. She possesses a rare ability to create everyday moments with her family and then train her readers to cling to the beautiful moments that happen all around us. So I know y'all are just in for a treat just to hear her talk. But she lives in the mountains of Tennessee with her dashing mountain man, Randy, and her 3 young daughters. Both she and her husband have ties to the Mennonite community, right?
And my husband's Amish, too.
Okay, so both. Playing.
Yeah.
And any time spent listening to her stories, either real or imagined, is a grand adventure. So you can get a preview of her blog at jolinapetersheim.com. So, Jolina, hey.
Hello, good morning. It's so funny. I was all in this zone. I was working on a kid's book this morning and just totally out of it. And all of a sudden, I'm like, I have to get clothes on. I mean, I was wearing clothes. I had my pajamas on. I'm like, I've got to get presentable. I've got to talk to people. So I apologize for being a few minutes late.
Oh, no, that's fine.
Yeah, I'm so glad you're ready.
And I'm so glad. Oh, I know. It just, my daughter actually, was my inspiration. So it's fun. So I hope she can be involved in it. But it's an honor to be with you all. I didn't even know what Zoom was. Rebecca said something about Zoom, and I'm like, oh, my lands, I have no idea. Does this require an engine or something? But thankfully, it's like Skype. So how many of us are here? It looks like 26.
I don't know if there's that many, but we've got several, and then we have a lot of people who watch the replay. So that's really
amazing.
Really cool. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, before we first start talking about your fiction colliding with your life, could you first tell us about your writing before the real writing? You know, like all the work you wrote that never saw publication?
There's a lot of it. And there will be a lot yet to come, I'm sure.
That's so encouraging.
Yes, I wrote all the time, kind of just growing up. We didn't have a TV for a majority of my childhood just because my dad was raised Mennonite, and he kind of just said that it just wasn't good for us, which I was really glad for that. And sometimes people would think we were too poor to have a TV, and they would drop one off, and then lo and behold, it'd disappear again. But because of that, I read books, and I loved to go outside and explore with my big brother, Josh. And we grew up on a Christian camp. My parents were caretakers. So we had about 365 acres just to roam. And it was an idyllic childhood. We just loved it. playing with pigs, and we had horses, and I swam in a horse trough when I was a kid for a pool. So yeah, it was great. But from that, reading stemmed a love to write, and I started writing at a young age too, and nothing really publishable. But some of the diaries are kept under lock and key. But I had, tiny little Hello Kitty diaries, the whole way through. And I credit a lot of my writing ability coming through the teachers who influenced me and made an effort to just pour themselves into my life. And they told me, like, this is too many descriptive words. And I received a lot of criticism, but it was constructive criticism. And that helped me kind of just see that they meant for my good, like, to just encourage me and make my talent sharper. And that requires a lot of just work. And I still have a lot of work to do. So I'm really grateful for them. And in college, the same thing. My professors came alongside me, and I was big into the double modifiers, and they helped tone those down. And just a lot of different things. I received a C on my first freshman comp paper, and I just sobbed, held my umbrella in front of me so the other students couldn't see me crying, and went to the library and stared at my little paper covered in red, and just couldn't believe that I got a C. I want to be a writer, and I can't even pass freshman comp. But she ended up being a great mentor. Her name's Nancy Benson, and she went on to publish a novel. And she just really allowed that fiction class and then a nonfiction class to kind of almost be therapeutic, to just kind of let me just have an outlet for creativity. And when, like, I went through some hard things my sophomore year, she allowed the nonfiction course to just, I lost a friend young, and I wrote about that in that class. My friend was going through cancer, another friend. And so I just wrote through all of those experiences. And from that came a love to write novels too once I graduated.
Wow, that's great. How did you get the idea for your debut novel?
It's actually based on a true story that my husband's family shared with me a few years after we were married, and it involved his great-great-grandfather on his father's side. And I was like, that needs to be in a book. And it was kind of scandalous because he had a son illegitimately. He sired a son illegitimately, which nobody knew about until the child came down with the same genetic abnormality as his father. And it was set in a Mennonite, he was a Mennonite man, a very conservative Mennonite community. And it made me think, wow, that's like the Scarlet Letter. And in a puritanical society, the only way we could tap into a puritanical society would be the Mennonite and the Amish, just in the present day modern society we live. And so those ties kind of came together. And because my best friend had gone through a bone marrow transplant, I thought I could use that as kind of the mode, the carrier for the whole story. And so that's kind of how it all came about. And I was a little unprecedented. I found my agent at an author reading. Didn't know he was an agent. He just had the last name Yoder. And I'm Petersheim, was a Miller. And so we knew we had to be related somewhere. And we probably actually are. And through Sadie Petersheim. And we just started talking about that. And he's like, well, send the story you're working on. I was like, why? I'm kind of protective of my work. I don't send it out a lot until it's ready, or until I think it's ready. That's another story. But and here he was an agent. He was the one who sold it for me.
Oh, wow.
That's so awesome. I love that story.
What's the name of that novel? What's the name of
The
that?
Outcast.
The Outcast.
And that's with Tyndale House.
Okay.
How did writing The Outcast change you as a writer?
I loved writing The Outcast. I started when I was pregnant with my firstborn, who's now just turned 6. And so I had this ability to just focus on it. My husband just built a new house for us, and I would have a fire in the fireplace and just write as my belly kind of grew. And it was just this concentrated, creative time. I knew Wes was interested, but the story wasn't completely finished yet. And it was magical. It was a magical 6 months. I worked often 9 to 4, 10 to 4. Long days, 5 days a week, because I wanted to get it finished before my daughter came. And I'm really glad I did that. And so I could, kind of get 2 dreams going, motherhood and being a writer. Not that it's always been easy, but it's fun.
Yeah. So then when you started moving to your second novel, did your mindset change? Was it scary? How was that?
It was scary, especially because I didn't have a lot of, just not a lot of confidence in my ability to do it. Like, I didn't know, I wasn't sleeping through the night because all I could think of, I assume most of us are ladies on here. The majority, I could just think, okay, I can feed my child. I know how to nurse. I'm just going to nurse her around the clock, and this will be great. And so I knew how to do that, but she wanted to do that at nighttime too. So all night long, she wanted to eat, and I fed her all day long. And so how was I supposed to work on a novel and just try to figure out motherhood and being an author and all of that? So it was very challenging. And it was ironic because the second novel is the story about a mother who risks everything to save a child who's not genetically hers. So it deals with gestational surrogacy and adoption and the sanctity of life and midwifery and all these things that I was kind of learning as I wrote. And so I'm grateful for that. It was just a stretching time, but it was beautiful too. I would just write with my baby on my lap.
That's so sweet. So with the midwife, when did you realize the midwife was going to be a special book to you?
Well, I actually probably with the midwife, the strongest lesson that I learned from that, like I've learned something from each of my books. And with that story, it was kind of just understanding the beauty of motherhood and kind of taking it deep into my heart and just knowing that had to be my first dream. My first goal was to put motherhood above all else. I mean, as far as work goes, like my husband, my relationship with the Lord and stuff, but as far as my dreams and day-to-day tasks. And I'm not sure I exactly had that down. It was hard to just juggle promoting the Outcast, writing the midwife, and doing all those things. And I was away a couple weekends in a row, and I actually traveled to Memphis, came home, and then I went back to my university, my old college, to promote a book. And while I was there, I actually started miscarrying my second child. And after that, I did miscarry the next day. And I was only like 11 weeks, but it still just made me realize that it's not worth it if I cannot really put my heart and soul into raising these souls of mine, like to bury a tiny little child in the ground. And it was a full circle moment for me. And I think in some ways I haven't promoted my other works as intensely as I did The Outcast. And it might reflect somewhat in sales. And yet a lot of my shift was just, I have to put these babies of mine first. And I now have 3. And so they do take precedence for me. But I enjoy having the creative outlet. But the midwife at that point just went from a story about this woman who is so distant from me, just this woman who is trying to understand the beauty of life, to being almost my own story. And I actually dedicate it to our unborn child and to those who have lost. I say, may you find beauty in the ashes, because that's what it really taught for me too.
Yeah, that's so good. And that's what I love about your blog. You're constantly bringing it back to where our minds need to be. So do you have any rules for yourself to help you keep your focus on your girls or your family?
I think God is a way of constantly aligning my focus just through my husband's medical journey. It's kind of always kept everything in focus. And yet what's crazy is even with something hanging over your head medically, you still can get caught up in the day to day, for instance, I've got laundry to do and dishes to wash and all of that because I have an idea for a kid's book. And so I started working on that, but then something else kind of falls to the wayside, and yet it's for my children, and so it's just this juggling act of trying to pursue our dreams and yet encouraging our children to pursue theirs. And because I do have 3 girls, I want them, when they are mothers, to have a little bit of a niche, just a little time for them to call out their creative gifts, because they all have different ones. And every night when I tuck them in bed, I just kind of call forth their destiny and the dreams of their life, because I know they're unique to each of us. And we are created in the artist's image. And so I think we're all artists in one way or another. And I'm just excited to see what those dreams will look like, and yet want to have a good example of having good priorities. So just seeking the Lord's grace and help, and knowing I fail, and asking the kids forgiveness and starting over. It's like Anna Green Gables, tomorrow's a new day with no mistakes in it.
Praise the Lord for grace.
Yes.
So what pushed you from purely, each of your books have had a unique kind of thread, but what pushed you from, bonnet fiction to apocalyptic or whatever, utopian?
Well, that was kind of unique. I was raised in an apocalyptically minded family, and my dad, during Y2K, I was 14 when that happened in 2000, and my dad just had food stored up in the basement, not a whole lot, but just enough to get by. I think some of us had some kind of plan. And just living with that, and yet knowing my dad was a pacifist because he was raised Mennonite, he wouldn't take up arms to defend ourselves or our family. Yet my little 11-year-old brother and all his vibrato was like, well, I would take up arms to defend us. And just that juxtaposition of belief systems intrigued me. And one day my dad was in our kitchen, and I was pregnant with Adelaide, my firstborn. And so this was years and years ago. Often my stories just take years to kind of germinate. But my dad said, we need seeds to last until the next harvest season. And heirloom seeds will actually replant themselves. If you save the seeds, you can plant them and they'll grow again. Whereas seeds that are like genetically modified, they only plant one time and you can't replant them. You have to buy the seeds every year. So he's like, we need heirloom seeds to last until next harvest season. I was like, the harvest season. And I thought that would be the title for the Alliance and the Divide. But from that, this story became created, and just about a community who is trying to survive when society breaks down around them through an EMP. Because you kind of think, well, Mennonites and Amish, they'd be fine. They're self-sufficient. They have a community. And yet what happens when the Englishers, those of us around them, want what they have and they don't take up arms to defend themselves? Are their beliefs because they've just been taught to them, or because they haven't been tested? And so that whole belief system was something that I learned too, and just is my faith in God because it's never been tested, or is it true? Has it been refined? So
that's amazing, because right then you were getting refined. Do you want to talk
yes,
about that?
Yes, ma'am. For sure. We lived in Wisconsin on a grid tie solar power farm, and we moved in November, and I had an 8-week-old and a 2.5-year-old. And 8 weeks later, when my child was 4 months old and still nursing and everything, my husband had emergency brain surgery for a benign tumor near his brainstem. And we're 600 miles from our immediate families, and wood stove, all of that. I didn't have a dryer because I wanted to be a little hippie and just try to live grid tie as much as possible. So even the sheets that he slept on, my nurse sister-in-law was like, they're not sanitary. They're not been dried in the dryer. And so just all of these experiences, and it was snowy outside, and my husband was healing, and family came out to see us, of course, and take care of us for like 3 weeks. But there was a gap of time between family came, and I remember just kind of looking out the window and was like, God, you've got to meet us here. You've got to meet us here. And I said it over and over, and he was just like both plea and command. And he showed up like that night. Both of my eldest daughter had croup. My youngest daughter was, relatively a newborn. And everybody slept through the night. My husband, he was determined to sleep on the floor in case my child needed him. And this is like, 3 weeks after brain surgery. And he slept on the floor. We all just slept through the night. And it was like, okay, we can do this. We are going to heal. Life's going to get back to normal. And honestly, it's not really gotten back to normal. And yet, just as in the Alliance and the Divide, the characters learn because of the journey and what they've learned about faith and belief. And I wouldn't want to go back to the person I was before 2014. And I know my husband would say the same. Our faith in God is deeper, and our love for each other is stronger. And so even though it's hard, we're grateful for it.
Yeah. Reading your blog, it's so evident. Sometimes I'll go back and I'll read an old post from like 2010, and it is just, it's like a different person.
I know. Yeah.
So, your new book is on marriage, right?
Yes.
So have you been tested? Do I need
Yes, you can ask that. No, yes, definitely. Well, because we went to Wisconsin, we moved there before the brain surgery and everything that took place. And it was a huge dream of my husband's to homestead and to have our little farm. And after his surgery, I just didn't feel entirely secure. And I missed our family. And once I realized that 6 months of my every year would be spent in winter, I was like, oh, I can't do this. And I was a little lonely, honestly. And so my husband, one time, he's like, you want to move back? Okay, we'll move back. And he put our house up, and like the next day we had people in our yard looking at it, and we sold it. I mean, it seemed like a couple weeks and we sold it. It moved very, very quickly, faster than we even anticipated. And I mean, life was slower out there, and it was sweet. It was harder. It was just stark. Like both the beauty and the pain was just more intense. And yet I'm so grateful. Like right now, my mom is watching my 3-year-old, and I love that ability to be around family. And because my husband's brain tumor is back, or they believe it's back, we're hoping for complete divine healing. It's nice to have that family still around us. And I do believe that God's led us. But coming back home to Tennessee after leaving those dreams behind, and he did it for me, caused a lot of just tension, I would just say. Like, it's not like we fought, but it just took a lot of time for both of us to kind of heal from the drama surrounding, or the trauma surrounding his surgery and the loss of dreams. We all have dreams. And this story is really, it's a loose retelling of Ruth set in a cranberry bog in Wisconsin. And it's really about two people. I got married when I was 22. And so I was this optimistic, naive girl. And then you go through life and it changes you. I'm not as naive. I'm not harder because that's just not my personality. And yet, I don't know, I am different than I was. And he's different too. And yet loving each other, making the choice to love despite those differences is something I think we all have to face at one point in the marital journey. And so that's where my characters are. And they get a second chance at that love, or you think they do. Woo! Yeah, it's a little bit of a twisty thing, but I really do love the story. It's been challenging, but good.
I can't wait to read it.
Thank you.
Is that one not out yet? I'm sorry, Rebecca.
No, it's coming out March 2019. So I actually have one more read through and then I'm turning it into Tyndale.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Great.
Can I ask a question too? What's it like writing in different genres?
Well, I kind of just dabble with whatever the story, like with The Outcast, that was just, it had to be set in a Mennonite community. And with the Midwife, it was all about midwifery and all of that. And it's still, like, Fanny Graber is still Mennonite, that one of the head midwives, but she uses the Hopen house, the midwifery house that she lives in, is kind of like a place where she can hide out from the people who want to take her daughter from her. And so each of these, I'm not always promising I'm going to write with the Mennonite tie-in, but at this point it's fit. But I mean, Tyndale knows, and I know that if ever it doesn't fit, I'm not going to push it. Okay. And with the Alliance and Divide, I kind of need the pacifist background to make that contradiction between belief systems. And with Ruth,
it's actually considered an Amish novel too.
With Ruth, it's set in a Mennonite community. It's probably my least Mennonite story, because she's English, she's actually Irish, and they met at an orphanage in Columbia, which my husband and I worked down in an orphanage in Columbia for a little bit. And so he has New Order Mennonite background, but just like in the biblical retelling or biblical story of Ruth, like Naomi and Ruth, they traveled to a place where Naomi's not been there for a while, Ruth has never been there, and they both feel like foreigners in a way. And so I just pictured these women going to this area, which would be an older Mennonite community in Wisconsin, and trying to reestablish themselves, to build their lives from the dust. And that's kind of where it begins for them.
Wow.
I can't wait to read that.
Yeah.
That sounds good. So how, I know with your blog, you tell such great stories of just everyday things. So how has being a writer colored other facets of your life? Does that make sense?
Like just maybe the way I look at life?
Right, exactly.
I think it's just the way my brain works. My eldest daughter especially is the same way. I think I figured it out through having her, I guess you could say a highly sensitive person, like where you're always constantly absorbing your environment, like what people are saying, emotions, sight, sounds, the beauty around us. I'm just constantly absorbing it and I can't shut it off. And I think it's a gift. I mean, I love it. I want to change that part of who I am. With my daughter, it can get like if she didn't understand a way to positively generate that stimulation into a good thing, it could stress her out. And so just trying to get her to, go for walks, explore her environment. So my outlet is writing, absorbing what I see and writing it onto the page. And I love how Flannery O'Connor, I believe is the one, or Eudora Welty, who says that, I write to understand what I believe or what I think. And that's the same way I do. Like I write to understand what I think and believe. And I can't really imagine doing it a different way. It's always been the way I kind of process long walks and chocolate and writing.
Well, you've been a huge encouragement and inspiration to me. So do you have you've given me really great advice, like use stronger stronger verbs.
Well, who knows?
Do you have any inspiration that you would give new writers who would?
I would just say read a lot, like, and explore your world. Listen to conversations at the coffee shop, in the grocery store line. I mean, regardless of where you are. I used to work in a grocery store with my husband when we first got married, and I would be, stocking shelves and listening to the conversation of people around me. And there are stories everywhere. Sometimes I do wish I could shut it off because, I'll be in an airplane and the guy next to me is saying something on a phone, and I'm like, oh, who are you? And sure enough, the guy across from me ended up being a federal air marshal, and I had to ask him and, all this stuff because stories are just everywhere. And my husband's an introvert, so sometimes he's like, honey, stop staring. You're making it uncomfortable. And I'm like, I'm eavesdropping. I can't help it. So just explore, listen, read a lot so you can know how to write, and don't make it too hard. Like, we're all storytellers in one form or another. And so just continue to write. And from that continuous, practice, your words will strengthen, your storytelling abilities will strengthen, and just let it flow naturally. Don't get sometimes I think we get too cerebral about it, and it can actually make it harder. Like with The Outcast, I didn't really know what I was doing. And I know my friend Julie Cantrell, she said the same thing about Into the Free, which was like a New York Times bestseller and blockbuster novel. She said she didn't know what she was doing. And so she just sat down with her blanket wrapped around her and her dog at her feet, and she just wrote the story, and it was just magic. And The Outcast was the same thing too. And then after you publish it, kind of like you have a certain standard. And so you want to meet it or surpass it. And it gets a little bit more intense. And I like goals and drive. And so that's okay. But yeah, just let the magic happen. Relax and enjoy the journey.
That's excellent. That's great. Johnny, would you like to open it up to everybody to come in and ask questions? I haven't been looking at the chat.
Oh, gosh. Well, we've had just a little bit of different discussion. Diana's here, and I'm really glad to have her back and talking about how she likes to hang out with writers. and then people are talking about different things they see and how they can build a story around it. So yeah, if anyone wants to jump on and ask a question, it's great to do that. But yeah, I'm really intrigued, and I don't know now that I'll get this all quite right, but I love the way you talked about these different ideas coming together to make a unique story. And Stephen King on writing in that book, he talks about that how you come up with an original idea is just to take two ideas and put them together. I think the example he was about Carrie, a teenage girl, and I forget the other thing, but it's like, I like what you said too about being too cerebral, because we think, how do you ever come up with anything original? Well, you just take two things and put them together, and you will. So like the heirloom seeds and 2000 Y2K, and it's like
Mennonite pacifism. Yeah.
Exactly, in the pacifism, and you have this original story. And then the other was like, okay, we bring back the Scarlet Letter, or we bring back Ruth and Naomi and put it in a modern setting. So yeah, I love that. You want to talk any more about that? I mean,
I think it does go back to just not overthinking it, and let the story evolve organically. I guess I am a little bit of a hippie, organic mom, granola mom. And so just let it naturally just come together. Like in this day and age, I think a lot of it comes down to the fact we have Google at our fingertips. And we can Google, you see it in motherhood. What should I be feeding my children? What should they be doing right now? How do I do this to the best of my ability? Even marriage. Oh, what am I doing wrong? What does my husband need from me? What do I need from him? And it comes like the same thing with writing. Like, what should I be doing? What should I be reading? Just relax. Shut off the internet. Step away. I mean, it's great to stay connected, and we need that to promote our work and as a stay-at-home mom, I love, and an extrovert, obviously. You've probably gotten that by now. I love to connect with people, and yet sometimes we also just have to shut it off, step back, just let the words flow, be out in nature, be with your family, let this story kind of come together. And if you are absorbing and being in your world and seeing it around you, every one of my ideas have come about because of conversations, being with family, having a child, my dad talking about the heirloom seeds, listening to a story about that inspired the Outcast. The Midwife was a little bit about the Mary Beth Whitehead case. So somebody had sent me an article or something about that story about a woman who kind of fought to keep this child who was just like genetically someone else's. And so every one of those ideas with Ruth, the story of Ruth it's coming out next spring. I was taking a walk in Wisconsin. It was freezing cold. The sky was like pale purple bands and the red barns. And I was walking on this just icy road with my firstborn daughter, and it was cold out and kind of just bereft and sad looking and yet beautiful too. And I just pictured this woman coming there with almost nothing except her children and these broken dreams, and just picturing what her life would look like. And so every one of those experiences inspired my story. So just live, get out there. Like Walt Whitman, he says, like, drink the wild air, be in the grass, like just get out there and live and be and do. And from that will come the inspiration for your work. I think that's one of the best things we can do in this modern age, is just to experience life. And from that will come our stories.
Yeah, I love that. Tina, I'm going to ask you to come on and please read what you just put in the chat. I love it.
Okay.
We'll give her a minute to do that. I want that to be your voice. It's not mine.
Hi, Jolina. I hate to intrude on your speaking. You're doing such an awesome job. I so agree with what you're saying, though, because we do need to let that whispered small voice of the Spirit through our gifts that He has given us be our guiding voice, and not the shouts of the virtual masses. We get that pressure on us to become what the world says we need to be instead of who Christ says we need to be.
Amen.
So, yeah.
It's brilliant. Yes.
Yes,
we need a like button. You're right.
Turn this into Facebook.
Yes. That's just
I'll go back off now.
I like your book, Sal.
Stay on. Anybody, it's fine to come on if you want to Jolina, a question or to make a comment. It's fine. Please feel free to do that. Robin mentioned in the chat earlier, she also is a survivor of brain surgery and has quite a story to tell too. So she's written about that. I hope she doesn't mind me saying this. And I had the privilege of reading her story, and it's just fantastic to see how God works through her in that. Robin, do you want to share anything?
Can you hear me? Am I unmuted?
Yes,
yes. Good.
Yeah, it's a new walk. I like being on this side of the brain surgery other than the other side. Mm-hmm. And I also get it that it's a gift that you see life differently, and it's sweeter, and it's you understand God's grace in a different way. So you learn to trust God differently. So yeah, that's kind of fun. So, but I did ask a question too in the chat.
Yes.
You write Amish fiction. Do Amish women read your work? I've often wondered that.
An ex-Amish woman I know read The Outcast. She's a friend of mine, and she said it floored her because it helped her understand her own mother, her experience in childhood. And because of my background and just even hearing the stories that my mom told me about, growing up in a Brethren family. They were Brethren, not Mennonite, but very similar to the Mennonites, and like living on a horse farm. And so I just kind of took those experiences again and put them on the page. And they gathered dandelion to sell to local restaurants to kind of supplement the income. They were a poor family with like 9 children, and just that became Rachel and Leah's parents. And I haven't really heard directly, negatively or positively from the Amish or Mennonite. I know Ira Wagler, he's not Amish anymore, but he wrote Growing Up Amish, and he inadvertently endorsed the Outcast. We became Facebook friends, and he messaged and said he never reads an Amish novel front to back, but he read The Outcast. He's not a fan of the Amish genre, but this is the only novel he's read front to back, and he liked it because it did ring true to form. And I think sometimes we can paint the Amish and Mennonites as being like a utopian society, and yet they struggle with the fallibility of man just like we do. And so I kind of tap into that a little bit with the outcasts and with all of them, I suppose, with the alliance and the divide. When they're faced with difficult things, life comes up to the surface, and sometimes that sin nature comes up to the surface, and just allowing God to navigate that and give us grace to cover our mistakes.
Wow.
Very good.
Very good.
Jolina, I noticed you seem to have a schedule. I mean, this is getting back to the nuts and bolts kind of, sorry, but
No.
How do you schedule your social media and your platform building and all that now? Because I know you're really good about it, but it doesn't seem to consume you. So how do you draw the line right there?
Well, actually, funny you should ask that. What I do is in the mornings, I get my child, my firstborn's in kindergarten right now. And so I'll get her off to school and get my children breakfast. And for about 2 hours, I'll do emails or social media stuff. And, I'm like anybody, I'll get stuck on something and then I kick myself later because I'm like, I just wasted an hour. I could have folded laundry. But then after that, I'll just use Cold Turkey. It's a program that you can put on your computer, and you can just set how many hours that you want to block it. And I can still listen to Pandora. So I can have like worship music playing in our house, something like that. But I can block whatever I want to block, because if you're on, I don't know, maybe people have better sense of discipline than I do, but I can just get down these rabbit holes, and I'll be on Amazon researching vitamins or, the best onesie for a 9-month-old. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And so I block it, and I can still listen to music. So kind of set the tone that way for our house. But, and then on my phone, I don't really have any apps on my phone beyond like the ones I need for my family. And so that also, you can put, it's called Freedom, and you can put like Freedom. So you can set it for 8. I always set it for 8 p.m. So I'll do it in the morning till about 8 a.m. And then I'll set it 12 hours or 11 hours until that night. And once my kids are in bed, then I can recheck it. And so that gives me, my brain sometimes just feels, if I can't just shut it out. And it's okay. If I can't get back to people within 5 minutes, it's all right. And I try to, stay in touch and, 24, 48 hours reply to people. But I think the creative process is best when we can really focus and not have all these search tabs open in our brain. And I want to also, that kind of comes back to motherhood and setting an example for my children. I don't want my daughters to be like this with their little phones or their tablets and stuff, but to just be exploring the world and making face-to-face conversations. And to want them to do that, I have to set the example.
True.
So kind of just trying to set the discipline on this end.
That's true.
But the only reason I have those apps is because I do struggle. So.
Yeah. And then your parents did that for you too. So.
Yeah, they did. And that is probably part of it. Just seeing, and it's just only been in the past, 10 years or less than that, 5 years, that we have seen people standing in line at the grocery store all looking at their phones. Yeah. And if you lose that face-to-face interaction, you lose those eavesdropping conversations and just hearing the little snippets of life going on around us. And so, yeah, unplug and listen, and from that will come the creativity.
That's so good.
It is. Rachel or Rebecca, can you put Jolina's URL, internet address, and the blog site address in the chat, please? I want to make sure I would do it, but I'm afraid I'd spell your name wrong. So I want to make sure
it's a hard one.
So we'll let Rebecca do it.
I was a Miller before I married, and that was a little easier to spell.
Either fine. There we go. What's next? Now, you said you're about finished with this book. You've got to do a read through, and it's going to be submitted. So what's the next project?
I'm kind of in a strange just time frame with my life too. Like, I've got 3 children now, and my contract is up with this novel, and at this point I'm not renewing it just because my husband and I have made a decision, like, together for our family. It'd probably be easier if I could just write without a contract, without a deadline, and yet and perfect it, and still be disciplined and write every day. But if a child is sick, if Lord willing, we believe he's completely better. My husband's very healthy right now. You would never know. There's a scan with something on it. But if I need to take off a month down the road, I can do that and not feel the stress of it. This has been a hard decision for me.
Sure.
but I have a story idea, and I know myself. I've written 2 novels without a contract, or 3 if you count The Outcast, because I wrote it before, or started it before I had a contract. And so I know I can do it. It just comes down again to discipline and putting my family first. And so I have a story idea. I want to write it. I'm excited about it. But I might take a break and finish this children's book that I was working on this morning.
Oh, that's good. I admire you for making that decision, because I'm sure it wasn't hard. I mean, I'm sure it was hard, but you've got a lot of years ahead of you, and
And the little years only last so long.
That's right. They do. You blink and those kids grow up and it's over. So, yeah. Well, good for you. Good for you.
Thank you.
Oh, bye, Jan. She's having to leave. Anybody else want to pop in and ask a question or comment or share anything? We've got a few more minutes to do that.
Don't be shy.
No, this is your chance.
I know you had a novel that you wrote before The Outcast.
2.
Oh, really? Do you want to talk about that?
One was really just kind of based on my experience growing up on the Christian camp when I was a child. And it was really good for me just to write it and kind of put my whole childhood out there and record it. And yet it wasn't a novel, but it was still, I don't think anything's ever lost in the creative journey. And so I learned how to sit down, what do they call it? Like put your butt in a chair, like just sit down and do it. So I learned that self-discipline, self-motivation. With my second novel, it was kind of a Southern fiction novel, and I sent it out to beta readers, and I still really love that story. I might dig it out a couple years from now, but 2 people loved it, 2 people didn't like it, and so it's like, well, what do I do from there? It's 50-50. But I think eventually I'll retell that story in some form or fashion.
Good. That's great.
And you learn a lot just from writing a novel. I think that if you want to learn to write a novel, you have to write a novel. I mean, you can read all the craft books and they're great. I mean, I still read craft books and read about how to write and how to be a better writer. But truly, you've just got to write the thing and see what you struggle with, see what's hard, see how to put a story together and a character arc together. And it's in the plot holes in the plot, where you paint yourself into a corner and then you have to get out. You have to write. You just about have to do it to learn how to do it.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
It's easier to edit a draft than it is to edit a blank page. I think I'm quoting somebody else again, but it's very true.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, Ayn Rand, I think, is where I first heard that. Just get that sentence on the page, because you can always go back and rewrite it. But yeah.
The first draft is always the hardest for me. Is it the same for you? Yeah, just getting it down.
Yeah, revising is so much easier, even if you do a lot of changes. And you find, I found I had such a time getting characters from one place to another. It's like, well, how do I get them out of this room? It's like, and then I learn different things I have little issues with as I'm reading other people's novels. I'm sort of like, oh, okay, yeah, that's just what they did. It's just made it easy and
transition it.
Yes, those transitions, because it's just that can be hard. And I tend to get very descriptive too, and I want to describe everything. And you learn, no, don't need to do that. Just paint the picture and get out of there. So, yeah. Well, this is fun.
It's fun.
So glad to have you here, Rebecca. Do you have any more?
Well, this doesn't exactly have to do with our topic, but since I have you, I want to ask you this. You mentioned to me a book that your publisher had you read, Goal, Motivation, and Conflict.
Yes.
So will you just touch on that, because that sounds so good.
It was really good. I was struggling with the Alliance. It was very challenging. I usually write novels that are very relational focused, and this one had a society breaking down and the relational aspects inside of that society. So usually the relational aspects affect everything, but this was the outside affecting the interior relationships. So it was the opposite. And so I struggled, and being in Wisconsin, not having family around, and everything that came with that, I think also affected me. And my publisher, they were kind enough to send me Goal, Motivation, Conflict. I forget who wrote it at this point, but it really just breaks down scene by scene. What's the goal of this scene? What's the goal of this chapter? What's the motivation of the characters? as they're reaching that goal. What's the conflict that is preventing the characters from reaching that goal? So it just breaks down everyone, and they will even take like, I think the Wizard of Oz was an example. Like, Dorothy wants to get home. The conflict is that she can't get home, or the motivation is because she wants to get back, and the conflict is the Wicked Witch of the West. And so you just have it all, or I forget, I don't know the story very well, but you just have everything broken down like that. And you can take every novel, your own story, and break it down and see the goal, the motivation, conflict of all of that. I think if you get too much into it, it can make you cross-eyed. But just like lightly looking at it, just making sure there's a conflict, making sure there's tension. Like, every page should have some kind of tension. It should have some purpose. And if it's not, it probably needs to be chopped. And one of the ways that really helps me is just to have an open document as I'm writing. And if I think a scene might be used or just seems kind of extra at that point, I can just cut and paste it, put it in that document, and put like the Ruth book extras. And then I can search and find, like, if there's a certain word in there, I'll just know, okay, well, I might put this back in later. I can just search and find it, plug it back in, reread it. So it keeps me from having a hard time killing my darlings. Like, I can just chop them out, and then I can put them back in. And it's nice just to be able to do that, so you can really see what you want and what you
don't. Yeah, save those darlings. You never know when you can use them.
Yeah, that's right. Makes it easier on the mama heart.
That's funny.
That's cute. Okay, Tina put a link in to, and I imagine that is the book, Motivation, Conflict, Building Fiction. I can't read. All right. Yeah, and then there's a comment, Tosca Lee is using her deleted scenes as a giveaway for subscribers to her newsletter, so you can always
Wow.
Yeah.
I don't think I'd be brave enough to do that.
Kind of like bonus material on a DVD.
Yeah,
you can.
That's smart.
Rework them, so that's a great idea too. All right. Well, I think then, if no one has any more questions, Rebecca, anything else?
Just thank you so much, Jolina, for being here.
Aw, thank you for having me. I loved it. It's been fun.
I love your excitement, enthusiasm, and just the way you embrace life. And I think that's really cool. So, if you're watching on the replay, we're so glad that you did. And you can join us on our Writers Chat Facebook group. We'd be glad to have you there too. Those of you who are here, please hang on, because of course we always have our after party. And yes, Jolene, thanks again. That was great. Rebecca, you did a great job too. So yes. It was a lot of fun. So we'll see y'all next week, and just have a good time writing.
Thank you, ladies. Bye-bye.
Bye.